The man they called Greystone didn't walk into the Meridian Club so much as arrive, the way a storm arrives, with a stillness before it that makes every hair on the back of your neck stand up. Von Osterfeld was 6'4" of Northern European genetics gone wrong somewhere in the third generation. With hands the size of dinner plates and a face that looked like it had been assembled from whatever was left over, after God finished building something better. He wore a black tactical jacket over a frame that barely fit through standard doorways, and his eyes, pale grey, almost silver, moved across the room with the flat, professional calm of someone taking inventory. Not of the art on the walls or the crystal chandeliers that scattered light like cold diamonds across the mahogany panels. He was taking inventory of exits, of staff, of the 47 people in the room who were about to have the worst Tuesday night of their lives. And right in his path stood Mina. Mina Okafor had been holding a tray of champagne flutes for the past 6 minutes, trying to remember which table had ordered the Bilkart salmon and which had ordered the Taitinger, because apparently at the Meridian Club these were not interchangeable. And she had already been informed of this twice by the floor manager in a tone that suggested a third time would be her last. She was 28 years old, 5'4" on her best days, and she had been working at the Meridian for exactly 19 days. Long enough to know the dress code required black and white, short enough that she still sometimes forgot which side of the plate the fish fork went on. She did not know that in approximately 90 seconds, none of that would matter. Just before I continue, I need you to drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'll be reading every single one. The Meridian Club occupied the entire second floor of the Caruso building on King Street West, which meant it had the kind of city views that cost more than most people's annual salaries and the kind of clientele who never thought about that. It was not a restaurant. It was not a bar. It was a private dining institution with a 60-year membership wait list and a kitchen that had appeared in exactly one magazine profile, which had been promptly purchased and suppressed by 3 of its members. Discretion was not a feature of the Meridian. Discretion was the product. At the best table in the room, corner, north-facing, with a sight line to every entrance and a proximity to the service corridor that a less careful man might not have noticed, sat Conrad Everett Ashby. Mr. Ashby did not look like a man who had built a private infrastructure empire across 4 provinces. He looked like someone's grandfather, which was both accurate and deeply misleading. He was 71, slight, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful posture of a man who had been told about his back at 60 and actually listened. His grey suit was the kind of grey that only exists if you pay someone a great deal of money to find it. He was speaking quietly to the 2 men across from him, associates who had flown in from Vancouver and who were smiling the specific smile of men who needed something. Mina had served his table twice already. He had thanked her both times. Actually looked up, made eye contact, said thank you, like he meant it. In 19 days at the Meridian, she could count on one hand the number of times a member had done that. She was halfway to table 12 with the Taitinger when the door to the private elevator opened. Later, she would not be able to fully explain what she felt in that first second. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the specific sensation of a room's atmospheric pressure changing, the way the air in a space shifts when something enters it that does not belong. Every conversation dimmed by half a register. The sommelier, midway through a pour, stopped without knowing why. A woman at table 9 glanced up from her phone and then looked away quickly. The way people look away from things they don't want to see. Von Osterfeld stepped through the doors. He was followed by 2 men who, by contrast, barely registered. Average height, average build, dressed in the kind of dark business casual that was designed to not be remembered. They moved to either side of the entrance in a way that looked casual and wasn't. Vaughan himself walked forward, and the room seemed to rearrange itself around him. Out of pure biological instinct, the floor manager, a precise man named Gerald who had worked at the Meridian for 22 years and who had once calmly managed a small kitchen fire without raising his voice, stepped forward. "Sir, members only. I'm going to need." Vaughan's hand came up and connected with Gerald's chest with a sound like a cabinet door slamming shut, and Gerald went backward into the coat stand, and the coat stand went over, and the whole thing settled into silence with a finality that left no room for interpretation. Nobody screamed. That was the thing Mina would remember later, how nobody screamed in those first few seconds. They all just went very, very still, like prey animals waiting to understand what kind of predator this was before deciding whether to run. Von Osterfeld scanned the room once, found what he was looking for, and started walking towards Mr. Ashby's table. The tray in Mina's hands was shaking. She became aware of this distantly, the way you become aware of background noise once someone points it out. The champagne flutes rattled against each other. She pressed her elbow against her ribs to steady it. She did not run. She wasn't sure why. Later she would tell herself it was because the service corridor was behind table 12, and she had to pass it to get there, which was true but wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was more complicated, and she never quite found the language for it. What she did was set the tray down on the nearest surface, the edge of table 11, whose occupants were pressed against the far wall, and stand very still and watch. Ashby's 2 associates had already moved. One was on his phone, pressed flat against the wall near the north window. The other had simply vanished, which suggested he'd found an exit Mina hadn't known about. Smart, reasonable. Ashby himself had not moved. He sat at his table with his hands folded and his water glass untouched, and his expression the careful neutral of a man who had been in difficult situations before and understood that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He watched Vaughn approach with something that looked almost like resignation, not the resignation of a man giving up, but the resignation of a man who has made a calculation and reached an answer he doesn't like. Vaughn stopped 4 feet from the table. "The harbor account," he said. His voice was low and even, almost conversational. "You moved it." Ashby looked at him over the rims of his glasses. "I don't believe we have an appointment." "We do now." The security guard, a former RCMP officer named Price, who had worked private detail for 3 years, and who was, by any objective measure, an impressive physical specimen, came through the service corridor door behind Mina with his hand already at his hip. He crossed the room in 6 strides, professional and purposeful, and put himself between Vaughn and Ashby's table. "Sir, I need you to." Vaughn turned and hit him, not with the theatrical windmill of a bar fight, with the economical targeted precision of someone who knew exactly where to apply force to create the specific outcome he wanted. Price went down without a sound, unconscious before his knees finished bending, and the whole thing took less than 2 seconds. The second security guard, stationed near the elevator, made his move and made it fast, and Vaughn dealt with him the same way, same economy, same silence, same terrible efficiency. The room had found its voice by now. Someone was crying quietly near the bar. Someone else was on the phone whispering the address. The sound of it felt very far away. Vaughn pulled out the chair across from Ashby and sat down in it, which was somehow more frightening than the violence had been. "The harbor account. Where did it go?" Mina was standing 8 feet away, half hidden by the edge of the service station. She had her hand pressed flat against the wood of the partition, and she was doing 2 things simultaneously. The first was staying very still and not breathing loudly. The second was looking at the tray she'd set down on table 11 and thinking. She didn't know who Vaughn Osterfeld was. She didn't know what the harbor account was. What she knew was that the man currently sitting across from Conrad Ashby was not going to leave without either an answer or a consequence, and that Price was not getting up, and that the second guard was not getting up, and that the room full of Canada's most powerful private citizens was entirely frozen. She also knew something else. She knew the Meridian's layout in the particular, granular way that junior staff know spaces, because junior staff are invisible, and invisible people pay attention. She knew that the service elevator behind the kitchen had a secondary access panel that opened onto the fire corridor, and that the fire corridor connected to the parkade on the building's east side, and that the parkade had a security booth with a direct line to 52 Division. She knew the Meridian's fire suppression system control panel was mounted inside the utility closet at the north end of the service corridor, 12 steps from where she was standing. And she knew that Vaughn's 2 associates were still positioned near the main elevator, which meant the service corridor was currently unwatched. Mina Okafor had been studying for her civil engineering licensing exam for 8 months. She had been working 3 jobs to pay for her mother's home care in Mississauga. The Meridian was the newest and highest paying of the 3, which was why she hadn't quit despite the Forkside lectures. She had never been in a situation that required her to make the specific kind of calculation she was currently making. She made it anyway. She moved. The service corridor was 18 feet of industrial flooring and fluorescent light and the smell of commercial cleaning solution. She covered it in 7 seconds, opened the utility closet, and had her hand on the fire suppression override before she'd fully processed that she was doing it. She did not pull it yet. Instead, she listened. Vaughn's voice, muffled through the wall. Laspy's voice, quieter. "Ash, nothing I can tell you. That will help you." A pause that contained something she didn't want to interpret. Mina pulled the override. The Meridian's fire suppression system was, like everything at the Meridian, the best that could be bought. It did not produce the theatrical ceiling-mounted drench of a standard office building. It released, from a series of recessed nozzles along the cornice line, a fine chemical mist designed to suppress flame without soaking the artwork. The effect, in a room without fire, was immediate and disorienting. A sudden haze of white, the sharp industrial smell of the suppressant, and the piercing cry of the alarm pulling every nervous system in the room to full alert. And then the main lights went out, because Mina had also hit the secondary panel 2 feet below the suppression override, the one that controlled the circuit breakers for the public areas. She had 30 seconds, maybe less, before Vaughn's eyes adjusted. She was already moving. She did not go back into the main room through the service corridor door. She went around, through the kitchen, which was controlled chaos, chefs abandoning stations with the professional urgency of people who had done evacuation drills, and came out through the north entrance, the one reserved for staff carrying large trays, the one that opened 15 feet behind, and to the left of where Vaughn had been sitting. The room was smoke and alarm and emergency lighting, the red glow doing strange things to the shapes of people scrambling for exits. Vaughn was on his feet. She could see him in the red light, still massive, still somehow oriented, turning with that flat professional calm toward the direction of the suppression system. He wasn't panicking, he was recalibrating. His hand was on Ashby's arm. Mina crossed the room. She had the fire extinguisher from the north wall mounting. She'd detached it in the kitchen. One of those small logistical decisions that the rational part of her brain was apparently still making, even while the rest of her was operating on something else entirely. She came at Vaughn from his left side, his blind spot in the chemical haze, and brought the base of the extinguisher up in a tight arc toward his hand where it gripped Ashby's arm. The connection was not elegant. It was not the precise, choreographed movement of a woman who had trained for this. It was the specific, committed impact of someone who understood leverage and applied it with everything she had. Vaughn's grip released. He turned. She hit the extinguisher trigger directly into his face. The chemical discharge hit him at point-blank range, eyes, nose, throat, and for the first time since he'd walked through those doors, Vaughn Osterfeld's calm broke. He reeled backward, one hand clawing at face, one hand reaching for her, and Mina stepped inside the reach. Closer, not farther, the counterintuitive thing, and drove her elbow into the side of his neck, where the muscle meets the jaw. She'd learned that one from her older brother, years ago in Parents Herent's driveway in Brampton. He'd been teaching her to defend herself against men who had more reach than her. He'd said, "Don't try to match the reach. Get inside it." Vaughn staggered. He didn't fall. She hadn't expected him to fall. Men like this didn't fall from one strike. She knew that much from the way he moved. But he was off balance, blinded, and that was different from defeated. And right now, different from defeated was all she needed. "Mr. Ashby," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The service corridor." Now, Ashby looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read in the emergency lighting. Something between stunned and recalibrating, the same look she'd seen from the table when Vaughn arrived, but pointed now in a different direction. He stood, moved. Vaughn's hand shot out and caught her by the wrist. His grip was extraordinary. The word for it was not strong. Strong was something you applied to ordinary force. This was structural, the closing of a mechanical thing, and she felt her wrist bones shift against each other in a way that sent white fire up her arm. She did not drop. She torqued her wrist against his thumb, the only weak axis in any grip, and threw her weight sideways and down at the same moment, and his grip didn't release so much as she slipped out of it like a wet rope through a closing hand. It hurt. She would discover later, in the hospital, that she'd cracked 2 small bones in the process. In the moment, she filed it under information she didn't have time for. She caught Ashby's arm and ran. The service corridor was behind them. She knew it in the dark. She'd walked it every shift for 19 days, carrying trays at 6 in the morning during setup, navigating it one-handed with dirty dishes at midnight during teardown. She knew where the floor dipped slightly near the supply room. She knew the push bar on the exit door was sticky on the left side. Ashby was not a man built for running. She'd clocked this immediately, his age, his frame, the careful way he'd held himself at the table. She adjusted, kept her hand on his arm, set the pace to what he could manage, and got them through the push bar and into the fire corridor beyond. The door sealed behind them. The corridor was cold and concrete and silent, a different world from the alarm and the haze on the other side of the door. Emergency lighting every 10 meters, casting pools of yellow on the floor, the sound of Ashby's breathing, and hers. For a moment they just stood there. "There's a security booth in the parkade," Mina said. "East side, 2 corridors down, direct line to 52 Division. Ashby was looking at her. He had his glasses slightly askew and his grey suit had acquired a dusting of suppressant chemical along the left shoulder. He looked, for the first time since she'd started serving his table, like a man who wasn't completely in control of the variables. "You killed the lights," he said. "Yes, that was use." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Who are you, Mina?" "I'm your waitress." "Mina?" he repeated. Something shifted in his expression. "How did you know about the suppression override?" I read the safety manual when I started. It was 17 pages. I had time. Ashby made a sound that might in another context have been a laugh. Most staff don't read the safety manual. I read everything, Mina said. It's a habit. She glanced at the door they'd come through. It was still sealed. We should keep moving. They moved. The parkade corridor was 2 turns and a half level down, and Mina found the security booth by memory and the faint glow of its monitor through the window. She knocked on the reinforced glass. The guard inside, young, startled, visibly processing the chemical residue on both of them, had 52 Division on the line in under a minute. While Ashby spoke to the dispatcher, Mina leaned against the concrete wall and looked at her wrist for the first time. She pressed her other thumb gently along the bone and identified the specific quality of pain that suggested this was going to be a problem. She thought about her mother's appointment on Thursday, her licensing exam in 6 weeks, the double shift she'd taken on Friday because Priya had called in sick and Mina needed the money. She thought about the way price had gone down without a sound. She put the wrist thought away and looked at Ashby, who had finished with the dispatcher and was standing very still in the way that she had come to understand over the past 20 minutes meant he was thinking. "They're going to want statements," he said. "I know, from both of us. I understand." He looked at her directly. "What you did in there, that wasn't." He paused. "Chose words carefully. That's not in the job description." "No," Mina agreed. "You could have gone out the east corridor," he said. Price's access card was on his belt. You'd have seen it when you passed him. She had seen it. That was true. Why didn't you? Mina considered this. There was an honest answer and a diplomatic answer, and she had spent 19 days at the Meridian learning which one this clientele preferred. But Ashby was looking at her like someone who had dealt in careful language for 50 years and could tell the difference from a distance. "Because the people in that room didn't have access cards," she said, "and because..." She stopped. Started again. "My mother has a home care worker who comes Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. She was a nurse here for 31 years. She had a stroke 18 months ago." Mina looked at her swollen wrist. She would have stayed in that room. She would have stayed and tried to help. "I'm not able to be less than that." Ashby was quiet for a long time. "The harbor account. The thing that man came for. It's a legal trust set up to fund infrastructure access in 3 northern First Nations communities. Potable water systems. I've been working on it for 4 years. Someone doesn't want it to proceed." Mina looked at him. "That's why he came," Ashby said. "Not for money. To make sure I'd be too frightened to continue." She thought about Vaughn Osterfeld sitting down across from him, calm, certain, with Price's unconscious body on the floor behind him. Did it work? Ashby looked at her for a moment. Then he shook his head. Something had settled in his expression, the specific resolution of a man who has made a decision and closed the door on the alternatives. "No," he said. "I don't think it did." The sirens reached them as a sound first, then as light filtering blue and red through the parkade's ventilation slats. Multiple units, converging. Mina could hear the organized cadence of it. Not random responders, but coordinated, which meant the Meridian security system had triggered an automatic alert, and 52 Division had taken it seriously. From somewhere above them, muffled by 2 floors of concrete, she heard shouting. She heard the heavy thud of what might have been a door. She thought about Vaughn Osterfeld still up there, recalibrated, searching. "They're going to find him," she said. "He'll be gone before they reach the room." Ashby said it with the certainty of someone who understood how men like Vaughn operated. "He doesn't stay when the terms change, and if he comes back..." Ashby was quiet for a moment. "Not tonight. But he will." Mina absorbed this. "Then, the harbor account isn't safe." "No." He looked at her. "And neither are you now. He saw your face." She had known this since the moment she'd crossed the room. She had known it as a fact, a variable, a thing to file under information she didn't have time for while it was happening. Now, in the concrete quiet of the parkade with the sirens getting louder, she let herself know it fully. It landed with the specific weight of a thing you can't put back. "I have a licensing exam in 6 weeks," she said. Not to him, really. More to the wall. "Civil engineering," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You said you read everything," Ashby said, and something in his expression shifted toward what she recognized slowly as respect. "The harbor project, the water systems in the north. Do you know what the primary infrastructure challenge is?" "Permafrost, ground conditions, and freeze-thaw cycling on pipe systems," Mina said, because she did. Because she'd read a project summary 3 years ago in an engineering journal, and it had stayed with her the way specific problems stay when you care about solving them. Ashby looked at her for a long moment. "When this is over," he said, "and I intend for it to be over, I would like to have a different kind of conversation with you. About the project, about what comes next." Mina looked at her wrist. looked at the door above them, where the sirens were now close enough to feel, looked at Conrad Everett Ashby, who was 71 and slight, and had sat at his table without moving, while a very large man destroyed 2 trained security professionals, and who had not stopped being himself for a single second of it. "Okay," she said. The door at the top of the corridor opened and the first officers came through, sweeping with lights, and Mina put her hand up against the glare. Beside her, Ashby put his hands up too, careful and calm, the way he did everything. The officers reached them. Questions came fast. Names, descriptions, injuries, timeline. Mina answered everything accurately and in order. She described Vaughn Osterfeld with the particular precision of someone who had looked at him and understood that she needed to remember everything: height, build, jacket, the way his eyes moved. The officers typed rapidly. One of them looked at her wrist. "You need an ambulance in a minute," she said. "I want to make sure you have everything you need first." The officer looked at Ashby. Ashby said, "She means it. She'll finish the statement first." He was right, she did. By the time the paramedic wrapped her wrist at the curb outside, the street was a controlled constellation of emergency vehicles and yellow tape and the organized bureaucracy of aftermath. The Meridian's lights were back on above them, the second-floor windows golden against the dark, looking like nothing had happened. Gerald, the floor manager, was sitting on a bench nearby with a compress on his ribs, talking to a detective. He looked up when Mina came out. Something crossed his face, the specific recalibration of a person revising a category. "Miss Okafor," he said. "Gerald," she said, "I set down the Taitinger on the wrong table before things went sideways. I'll sort it out on Thursday." He stared at her. Ashby, standing nearby and waiting for his own conversation with the detective, heard this and looked away quickly in the direction of nothing in particular. Later, much later, after the statement and the hospital and the long drive back to Mississauga with her wrist in a brace, Mina sat at her mother's kitchen table while her mother slept, and she didn't. The licensing exam notes were spread in front of her. Freeze-thaw cycling on pipe systems. She'd been working on that section for a month. She thought about the moment she'd crossed the room with the fire extinguisher. The decision point, which hadn't felt like a decision, which had felt, if she was being honest with herself, more like a direction she was already facing, and simply began to walk in. She thought about Vaughn Osterfeld's grip on her wrist. She thought about Ashby sitting at his table with his hands folded, waiting. She thought about her mother, who had stayed in rooms when leaving would have been easier, for 31 years, and what that cost and what it was worth. She picked up her pencil. She started working. 3 weeks later, the detective who had taken her statement called to tell her that Vaughn Osterfeld had been apprehended in Hamilton, connected to 2 similar incidents in Alberta. The harbor account, she said, was now under RCMP protection pending the full investigation. Mina said thank you and hung up and went back to her exam prep. 6 weeks after that, she passed her licensing exam on the first attempt. The week after, she received a letter on Caruso building stationery, formal header, careful language, the kind of letter written by someone who understood the weight of words. It invited her to a preliminary consultation on the Northern Water Infrastructure Project. It listed the project's scope, its timeline, the specific engineering challenges involved. At the bottom, in handwriting different from the typed text, were 4 words. She read everything. Good. Mina folded the letter once and set it on the table beside her mother's morning tea, and she thought about how some rooms you walk into and some rooms you choose to walk toward, and how the difference between the 2 is smaller than people think. She picked up her phone and accepted the meeting.